Good afternoon or good evening. My name is Robert Troy. I'm the Dean of Students at the Padron campus of Miami-Dade College, and welcome to our session at the 40th anniversary of the Miami Book Fair. So let's give a little. Okay, we are grateful to the Miami-Dade College family and volunteers, and for the support of our sponsors, including the Green Family Foundation, Zibby Media, the J.W. Marriott Marquis in Brickell, and Nicholas Children's Hospital, and all other sponsors. We'd also like to thank our Friends of the Fair members. Friends receive multiple benefits, so please consider a Friends membership or giving a gift to someone. As we celebrate our 40th anniversary, please consider supporting the Miami Book Fair with a contribution to our Next Decade Fund. Visit the Friends of the Fair table or our website for more information. So it's my great pleasure now to introduce to you GUISELL GÓMEZ, who is Editor-in-Chief for Be Latina News. She writes about politics, current affairs, and issues affecting underrepresented communities, and she'll introduce our speaker for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can you guys hear me? Yes. Okay. And I have here Aida Rodriguez. I'm a personal fan. You know, she's a stand-up comedian. Many people know her as that. But aside from that, now she's an author, the author for Legitimate Kids. And we're going to go ahead and talk about that. But welcome, Aida. You know, she's Miamian too. She has some Miami roots too. So, you know, welcome back.
Thank you. I appreciate all of you being here. You know, Miami is not my home anymore. But my mom lives here. So I'm just happy to be back. I just came from Chicago, so I'm a little bit tired, but it was important for me to be here. So thank you for being here.
So first and foremost, there's different geographical locations that, you know, Aida speaks about in Legitimate Kids. And of course, like, I started with the Miami part because, you know, she grew up in Alapata, so did I. Mm-hmm. And she talks about, you know, very important parts of Alapata, like La Mia, Comstock Park, and, you know, also like the prevalence of Spanglish. So I hope, you know, those of you who are here local understand what that means. But I'm gonna get right into it. Like, I wanna know, like, this was a very well-written book, and it was very thoughtful and intentional as I read it, you know, page by page. But how long did it take you to write? Because there were so many things going on in your life.
Yeah, it's hard to write a book when you are touring for a comedy special. And there are two different muscles, because if you've read the book, you know my book is not funny. And it was really, some people felt betrayed by it because they thought it was going to be another comedy memoir. And I intentionally decided not to write it. I just wanted to tell my story without the burden of a punchline. I just wanted to just get it out. But it took me like 7 years. I started writing the essays 7 years ago, and then I really buckled down and wrote the book in 2 years.
That's amazing. And something that I found very interesting is how you divided the book in different sections. Would you please talk to us about that and how you were able to name these sections the way that you did?
You know, I think that people go through changes, and everybody, especially now in the age of social media where everybody is a philosopher and a guru, and you go online and people will tell you, you know, this is the way. I'm a Star Wars person. That's very Mandalorian language, but for me, I identify with with evolution, and I think that most people should evolve. Though I feel like there's a culture of people who really enjoy keeping people where they are, not giving them room for growth and evolution and change, I think it's important that we acknowledge that those things are possible. And so for me, my evolution, I likened it to that of a butterfly. And it wasn't just enough, you know, it is cocoon, metamorphosis, wings, and flight. But some people have wings but are afraid to fly. And so I wanted to just talk about the responsibility you have to yourself to soar and to go get the things that you want to do. Growing up where I grew up, I had mixed messages. I had amazing teachers that told me I could do whatever I wanted to do. And then I had people in my neighborhood saying, you're aiming too high, you're too ambitious. Like, why do you want more? Why you think you're better than us? And I was like, no, I think I'm better than the me I was yesterday, and I deserve more for myself, and I want to fly. So I wanted to encourage people to fly, and everybody, you know, not just Latinas, not just Latin people, not just Puerto Ricans, everybody. I think one of my favorite, I love Kurt Vonnegut, and my favorite book is A Confederacy of Dunces, and I saw myself in those books, and I hope that other people can see themselves in mine.
You know, and it's interesting that we're here right now and that you spoke about your educators just now. Within your book, you write a few times that you had teachers the same, readers are leaders.
Yes.
So talk to, like, it's like a full circle, right? Right now, you know, you started off, you know, in the literary world, you loved your language arts teacher.
Yes.
And then you're here, you know, speaking in book fairs, you're a writer now, you're an author. How does that make you feel?
You know, it's full circle more than you would know. I went to Miami-Dade when I was in high school. I did dual enrollment, and I took some language arts classes here while I was in high school. You know, I think that there's a big emphasis on literature for children in school. They're told you want an extensive vocabulary, you want to score high on standardized tests so that you can get scholarships, so that you can go to college, so that you can leave, which I think is mainly why there's so much emphasis on language. I think reading is instrumental in the development of the mind. For those of us that come from lower income neighborhoods, that's your way of traveling and being able to meet other people and other cultures and go other places and see other things. And for me, that was the first book I read was very traumatic. I read The Jungle, and I was like 8 years old. Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, and I was like 8 years old reading a book about children being, you know, abused and fingers getting crushed in meat, and but you know, it gave me perspective. It gave me a sense of gratitude, knowing that I was growing up in a time where that was now illegal, and having a sensibility about those kinds of things. I just think that, you know, I thank God for my teachers. Sylvia Roll, she passed away last year, and she was one of the most influential people in my life. She was the one that said, you want to know the words, baby. You want to know the words, because those SAT words, she was like, you don't have to know anything. You just got to know how to take the test. And the way you take the test is by knowing the words and learning, you know, learning the tricks to do well on the test. And I was fascinated by words. English is my second language. I grew up in one of those homes where I was not allowed to speak English because you're going to learn, va a aprender inglés en la escuela. Like, she'll learn English at school, pero en la casa se habla español nada más. And so I was fascinated by words. Like, I was having a conversation with someone yesterday, and I was like, I have a favorite word in the English language. My favorite word is druthers. It makes me feel like, because it's like choice, but it's like palatable choice. And I love that word. But I was fascinated with words because I was told that they gave me power.
That's true, they do. You know, and I thought I was the only one that had a favorite word in English.
What's yours?
Disintegrate. I like how it rolls off my tongue. But, you know, something that you just said is that, you know, for those of us who grew up in low-income households, books was, you know, that was our travel agent, right? And what I enjoyed about your book is how you try to, like, of course, you were very real about what it is to grow up in La Plata and, you know, in these different neighborhoods, aside from Miami neighborhoods. You humanized it almost, you know.
Of course.
And I'm like, how, and you did it in a way that was so elegant, but when you were writing about, you know, your experiences in these households and in these, you know, épocas, you know, how were you able to do it in such a, you know?
I just close my eyes and go back in time and remember the days when I would run down a block and Maria and Matias from Cuba lived in the corner and they were black. And Berta and Pedro, who were, Berta was the most beautiful woman with blue eyes and black hair, and she was from Cuba. And Naomi, who was Dominican, was here. And I just thought about how all of those people who had regular jobs that were making a living so that their kids would have an opportunity to do well in life and have opportunities that they didn't have. And mind you, some of these people were doctors in Cuba, or people that came from the Dominican Republic that had, a formal education. I would argue a better education than the education that is given to kids in this country. I met kids that were like, already knew algebra when they got here, and we didn't learn it until high school. So when I think about those people, Fito, who would make las fritas and Cuban pizza and the seafood place, La Camaronera, like I grew up in this village that was people who I thought were beautiful, and sure, they weren't, rich people or by any stretch, but they were rich in values and culture. They were all concerned with my well-being because they would call my mom, Aidita está en la otra cuadra, vete a buscarla. That's my Cuban accent. It was, I just think when you think of Miami, when you see Miami, I work in Hollywood and I'm developing TV shows and I'm working in film. Every time you see Miami, it's like the people in Miami are caricatures, right? It's like South Beach, and it's like all these flamboyant queer people. The Cubans are all racist, right? The black people are all ghetto, and they all sound like Trick Daddy. And, the Dominicans don't wear socks. Like, it's like you see this world that's painted by people who don't know us and don't know that Puerto Ricans are not the only ones that dance salsa or drink Malta, that Venezolanos drink and Colombianos drink Malta Polar. And, I grew up feeling so enriched with this cultural experience of Miamians that you never get to see on television because they're always just showing these exaggerations of who they are. And the truth is that people get up and they go to work and they live next door to Haitians and they live next door to Jamaicans, and the Jamaicans speak Spanish and the Puerto Ricans eat escovitch fish, and the majority of the people are not concerned with what you see on television because the television is always showing the exception or the exaggeration. And I wanted to show people that the people of Miami that are not on South Beach are also beautiful people, and they don't have to be models, and they don't have to drive sports cars to contribute to this country.
And personally, that was very much appreciated that you drove away from, the stereotypes.
Oh, no.
So I thought that was beautiful. And, in your book, you also write about different nuances within the Latino and Latina community. And one of the ones that stood out a lot to me is because I'm part of the LGBTQ community, and you spoke about your uncle and the complexities of not only being a queer man, but a queer man, in these neighborhoods that are, usually not accepted, right? Was this a way to honor him, and how did it feel, to write those sections?
So my uncle was murdered in Liberty City in a hate crime. He was killed by 4 young men that beat him to death because they found out he was queer. And he raised me. He was the biggest man and the greatest man I ever met. He was my father because he raised me as his own. And, we have to talk about this stuff in our communities because we're very toxic. Puerto Rico has a very high rate of, femicide. They also are killing trans women. Queer people are getting murdered. All over Latin America, we have these tropes. I think that what happens is that when we have these conversations, we do it with demonization in mind as opposed to understanding. Like Dominicans, they hate Haitians. There's no exploration is going back in time to understanding that there's a trauma there that came with a president that was murdering people. Like when you think about queerness and you think about our communities, what the social consequences are, and even just consequences, period, when people are so homophobic that they're willing to kill somebody, they're willing to kill a trans woman for using a woman's bathroom. And I just wanted to give a voice to those experiences because yes, those things are wrong. Anti-Blackness is something that's very prevalent, not just in the Dominican Republic and in Cuba, also in Puerto Rico. They romanticize some countries and say, oh, we don't do that in our country. Anti-Blackness is something that happens globally. It happens all over the world. Black people are anti-Black with each other. Spike Lee did a whole movie called School Days about it, So I just think that, I wanted to talk about that experience, and I wanted to give my uncle I'm actually working on a project based on his life because my uncle was queer, but he wasn't effeminate. And that doesn't mean he gets a prize for it, he just presented differently. But if you watch television, there's only this archetype of what queer people look like, and they're always an exaggeration. You know, it's almost like they are trying to embody what they perceive a strong woman of color to be. And it's so misinformed and it's so offensive to women of color, one, because everybody's not tough. But I just think it was important to let my uncle live in who he was. And he had 4 brothers, and they were 5 men that they grew up together. They played basketball together. They played football together. They fought together. They hung out together. And he was queer. And if you saw them, you would not know he was queer, which is why he got murdered, because when they found out that he was, they were like, oh my gosh, you betrayed us. But I just think it's important to have conversations about this stuff within our community, because what we do is we go outside, and sometimes you can't talk about family, you know, with the company. We have to have like these internal conversations within our Latinidad about where anti-Blackness comes from. People were taught this, people were colonized, they were beaten, they were abused. People are trying to assimilate because they don't want to be the punchline. They don't want to be, it's all rooted in fear. And so I just wanted to talk about it on a very basic level. I didn't want to be, well, my philosophical explanation of the queer nation. Like, I didn't want to do that. I just wanted to say, these are people, everybody's flawed, everybody makes mistakes. You know, the good people are the ones that are like, hey, I want to be better. And the ones that are stuck, you know, we can do without them. But there are some people who, you know, I had to teach my grandmother's husband, because my grandmother was vehemently against using the term pelo malo. And I would say to him, you know, do you know that's hurtful? You don't say that. What you're trying to say is a different texture of hair, rizos, or whatever it is. But I didn't burn set my grandfather on fire because he didn't know. And it wasn't because he was evil, it was because he was ignorant. And I think it's just important to really explore those things.
It definitely is. I think we crucify a lot of, like, you know, our people for not seeing life how we see it, you know, and we're more educated than, you know, our past generation. So yeah. That's important. Thank you so much. And you know what? I know that your uncle was one of the people who raised you, and you speak about, you know, that you lived in a multi-generational home. Mm-hmm. And this was almost, to me, I saw it as a blessing because you had so many people mm-hmm. raising you. And I know, like, a key theme is that you didn't have a father, but the way I saw it was like, goodness, you know, Aida had 5 parents. That's mm-hmm. so beautiful. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that had a lot of impact in your adulthood and mm-hmm. writing your book. How did it impact you as you were writing it?
Well, I mean, when I started writing, I wrote one chapter about my uncles, and I was like, this is not enough. They each need their own chapter. And so I decided to write about them individually and give them their own, let people see what their personalities and what their function was in the family. I think, you know, I didn't grow up hating men, which somebody came up to me at a book event in New York and was like, you must really hate men. And I was like, why? And they were like, because they've been really bad to you. And I was like, well, some of the women were kind of shitty too. Like, it wasn't just all men. And if that's the case, I'm going to hate everyone. But I don't hate men. I think that, you know, all of the people in our village serve a function, and it may not necessarily be what society says, you know, masculine, feminine, the men do this, the women. My grandmother did stuff that, you know, she would go fishing and crabbing, like she enjoyed doing it. And my grandfather, her husband, would cook, and he would make the bacalaitos and all of that stuff. It was very different. I didn't ever think he was queer or that she was a butch or what's the term? Because isn't butch derogatory now? It's,
mass presenting.
That's too much. That's too. A stud is the term
A
I was
stud,
looking at.
okay,
A stud is what I was thinking, like,
All right.
you know. 'Cause
Fair.
You want your abuela to go around saying masculine presenting. She be like, get the hell out my house. God, fuera de aquí. No, it was, you know, I just think it's important to, when I don't know something, I don't pretend. I ask, which is why I'm always getting canceled. But I think it's important to, you know, like, I think it was just important to give them all their own flowers. You know, I grew up with 5 uncles. Being Latina, I have heard some of the most horrific stories about uncles, right? When we talk about sexual abuse within our communities, there have been so many people that I know who will tell you that uncles did this and that, and I did not have that experience at all. And I wanted to exalt them and show people that men are complicated, but they're not llamas, they're human beings. And even though we live in a patriarchal society, if we want to see change, it's going to take men, right? Just as if we want to deal with racism in this country, it's going to take white people. It's not just going to be the people of color. So we have to be able to, and I know people always get mad at me because they're like, oh, you want to give the olive branch, and I'm like, well, what's the alternative? Like, is anybody getting on boats and going back to their country? You know, are men and women going to separate and live in 2 different dwellings? No, we have to exist, and if we're going to exist, we have to find. I'm a solution person. That's the only way I've been able to survive in life. If I stayed my whole life pointing out at all the bad things that happened to me, I would just be one miserable person, walking around just being a victim. And I made a decision that I wanted to live in solution. And sometimes living in solution is uncomfortable, and it's sometimes working with people you don't want to work with.
You know, and I noticed that throughout your book that, you know, because a lot of like other Latinos and women and anyone that would have gone through your experiences probably would have like spoken more about how this impacted their mental health, right? And of course, you talk about going to therapy, you talk about, you know, taking it seriously and actually doing the work, right? Which is also like a little weird within our community because we're like, nah, you gotta go to church, and you know, church is gonna heal you. So
it didn't heal me.
Exactly, right? So let's talk about how you were able to bridge, you know, who you are now, your mental health, and not letting it dictate you, you know? You're not.
I started going to therapy early, but before I could afford to go to therapy, I started reading books. And I started reading metaphysical books because, you know, people started telling me about these books and these, you know, subconscious mind programming, how, you know, the way you think, ironically, all of that is the Bible, right? A man is so as he thinketh, and it's all these universal laws. Like if you think about all the religions, if you read the Torah, which I have, the Quran, which I have, I've read, you know, the Bible. Like if you read all of the doctrine, it all says pretty much the same things. Like don't go around killing people. Don't take what's not yours. You know, the way faith is believing in things that you don't see yet. Like all of that stuff, those are all universal laws. And I started reading about it, and it started making more sense for my left brain, because religion was always given to me emotionally, and I couldn't process it. Because when people would catch the Holy Ghost, I would get scared, and I was like, she's either faking it or she's possessed. Like, I was like, this is not cool. And I just remember thinking to myself, and that doesn't, you know, like if anybody in here is religious and Christian, it's not me saying that I don't believe that that's true. My experience was, it felt like mass hysteria. And so I needed to find something that resonated with me intellectually so that I could be able to understand what this stuff meant. And it came through, you know, reading Napoleon Hill and reading those books, you know, Think and Grow Rich and The Secret, which became something hokey later because, you know, they did infomercials and some other corny shit that they started figuring out they could make money off of it. But it was like based on these universal principles about, like, I believe the universe agrees with a made up mind. That's my mantra for life. And when I started to learn about that stuff, it started really helping my mental health, because then I started to have power and ownness, and instead of waiting on this magical solution to show up, and it's like the old, the man who's, the boat keeps coming, and he's like, God's gonna send me a boat, and God is like, I sent you 3 boats. Like, it's that I had to really, because I grew up in a community where people accepted where they had to be because they believed that they couldn't go beyond that. And I was always, they always, used to say, she thinks she's better than us. And I was like, no, I think we're all better than us. Like, we can all go. I'm not afraid to go do it. And so all of that stuff started helping me with my mental health, because I started to understand that I have power in my own life, and I have my own responsibility while I'm here. And I didn't come here with anybody. I wasn't a twin, and I have to fulfill my own purpose. And spiritually, it started to feed me in a very different way.
Love that. And again, there's so many themes within your book, and it was very well thought out. Like, now that you've released it, people have read it, did your favorite part of your book change? Like, I'm sure you had a favorite part at the beginning of your process, and then now, that people are talking about it, do you identify with your book a little bit different now?
When I read that book, after I wrote it, I cried a lot, because I had realized that I didn't process my uncle's death because I was so young when he passed away, that it was just this whole thing in my head. I remember standing in front of his coffin and being able to read in the book. And I finally, I grieved, because I didn't grieve. My grandmother was mourning. She lost her son. She wore black for a year. My family, it was as if I didn't have the right to grieve, because I was just a kid and I didn't really know what was happening according to them. But when I sat down and I started reading the book, and, my favorite part of the book, I have favorite chapters. My Uncle Davy is one of my favorite chapters, because he's the one that introduced me to stand up and hip hop, and he's the one that used to go to my school on a bike and beat people up who tried to bully me. And you could really use that during those times. My uncles are my kids, my mom, because I wanted to make sure that I am, in therapy, and I'm trying to be a better person, but I'm still not one, we never get there, right? And I remember this lady said something about my mother, and I was like, bitch, don't you talk about my mama. I was like, Mama, I'm very defensive about her, because I was telling the story in hopes that it would help other people, but not to demonize my mother or my father. They got their own trauma. And when you think about your parents, I read Louise Hay, How to Heal Your Life. I read all those books. And she said, think about your parents as kids. Think about your parents as children in their own lives, and think about their experiences in life during the time when they were children. And it will give you a different perspective on them. When I think about my mother being 9 years old, and only, 5 years later, she had her first baby. You know what I mean? Not fully developed, as her brain would not fully develop for another 12 years. And she was a mother. And so to give my mother that grace was also healing for me, because it's so easy to say, I don't do stuff like that. I'm not like that. That's them. They're the ones that do that. That's so easy to do. But when you turn that mirror on yourself, and I was sitting in front of my mirror and I'm like, what are my kids gonna say about me? And I panicked, because I was like, they got their own book. And as hard as I tried, and as much as I thought I was doing it right, and I wasn't like my mother, they still have their own complaints in a log. And I just, for me, it was just about telling the story about these people and bringing them to life, forgiving my father. I will share this with you, and I hope somebody takes it with them. What I learned about forgiveness was that it is the greatest form of self-care, because forgiveness is not for others, it's for you. And we hold on to forgiving people like we're doing a favor for them. I'm never gonna forgive you. that's their work. They're going to figure that out. But when you truly are able to forgive somebody, you give yourself the greatest gift of forward motion that is so healing and so helpful, because all of that disease is dis-ease in the body, and all that hate and resentment, it is a breeding ground for illness. And so for me, it was just learning all of those things was so helpful for me, because it just gave me, I just thought about my mother and my father as kids, and I was like, how else what would I expect them to turn out? They were raised by even more, it was more savage than what I thought I was raised. My mother was beat with extension cords, naked, and my father never got hugged by his mother. She'd never say, I love you, like those things. And I was just able to say, I think that there's room for healing, and at the same time, you can still say, I don't mess with you anymore. I don't need you in my life. I don't want you in my life, but you can still forgive and move on.
I will say, Ida, that your book was healing,
Good.
So I hope whoever reads, Ida's book, they also take that, with them. And you've captured the beauty of storytelling.
Thank you.
How would you what would you tell other women who are trying to get into the space? What tips do you have to give them?
Get it out of your system. Write it. Don't think about structure. Don't think about form. Don't think about mechanics. Get the story out. Get it out of your system and put it out on the page, and then worry about that later. The story is the most important thing. When it has the heart, you can go. Mechanics and structure is something you can learn on the internet. You can talk to somebody that can help you with that. But the story is what speaks to people. And the literary world is very pompous. I experienced a lot of people that were very snooty towards me because I'm the comedian writing a book. And it's very intimidating to people who don't have a literary background, who don't have a degree in English or writing. And I will say to you, if some of the greatest writers I know in Hollywood didn't go to college, and some of the most educated writers that I know write the biggest bullshit in Hollywood. And I think that a lot of that is just capitalism and elitism, classism, and all of that stuff. But the real stories, Oscar Wilde, Waiting to Exhale, books about people that you never heard of before and that resonate with a lot of people because they're about the human experience. You have that too. You are here. We are all on this plane at the same time, connecting in one way or the other for a reason, and you have the power to connect with people just for telling a story that others can relate to, or get a perspective of. There are people who, white older gentlemen that have read my book and said, I was very interested in reading it because I had an opportunity to see your world and to see people that I didn't grow up with and I didn't see. It humanizes your experience, and it gives people, it gives them a little peek into your world. So don't allow yourself to be intimidated. And I know that's easier said than done, but just get it out, write it all out. Keep writing, keep writing, keep writing. The young woman, Michaela Cole, who wrote the show, she wrote a show called I Will Destroy You, I think it was called. She wrote 100 versions of that script. There were 100 rewrites, 160 rewrites. And I May Destroy You, I think it was. And it was, it's an award-winning show, but just if you want to tell your story, do. There's no right or wrong way to do it. You will always find the resources to make it, to structure it and tighten it. The most important thing is getting it out. And once you start writing, you'll find your way. It's just a matter, you get that paralysis because you're like, I'm not going to be able to finish this. I don't know how to do this. I'm not a real writer. Just keep writing. Write your way through it.
Take some questions.
Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you so much for being here, Ida. I've been a really
Thank
big
you.
fan for a long time. I'm really happy to see you here. I have a question. Being someone who grew up in Miami, whenever you come back to Miami, do you have like a favorite restaurant or place you like to go to?
That's a beautiful question. Yes. So the pizzeria that I used to go to growing up was on 28th Street off of 22nd Avenue. It closed down, but that was where I would always go to, and I would get Cuban pizza. I go to La Camaronera, which I mentioned earlier, and I get a minuta and bollitos de carey. That's those like hush puppies, but Latino style. And I go get stone crabs, the stone crab claws, because I go to Joe's because they don't have those in California. But that's on a good work week. If I got some money, yeah, because if not, I'm on 8th Street eating sopa de pescado. Like, that's it right there.
That was a fun question. Hi.
Hi.
I love your work.
Thank you.
And speaking about money, I'm curious how having more access and money has, I guess, what's that like? Like, what's good and hard about having the level of fame that you have now?
Wow, I mean, I don't ever think of myself as famous. Obviously, not that famous, right? But, which is fine, because I never set out to be famous. I set out to be good and great. Like, George Carlin is my hero. I don't do stand-up because I want to be famous or be a Revlon model. I do stand-up because I want to influence change and provoke thoughts and make people laugh. I have to believe that I've arrived at a place where, I am the only person in my tax bracket in my family, so I'm a we person, I'm a village person. I take care of my mom, I take care of relatives. I was just telling my friend that my sister called me from the Dominican Republic and was like, I need blood. And I'm like, wait a minute now. Like, I don't know if I can pull blood off. That might be a little too heavy for me. But responsibly, I'm very responsible, fiscally responsible. I think that it's important to me to make sure that I don't have to struggle and go through the things. I was in Chicago doing the moth, and I was doing a story about how I was indoctrinated into believing that I needed to marry a man with money, like buscate un hombre que te cuide, and I realized that reinforces the belief that you can't get it on your own. And then that puts a this heaviness on a relationship where now you're dependent in a very unhealthy way. So for me, it's about like, I read the Rich Dad, Poor Dad, like I read those books. And for me, I don't live above my means because I'm not rich like some people would think. I'm just comfortable. I'm doing better than I was. But I save more than I spend. I shop at Target. I wear clothes from Target. This is from Zara. Like this was on sale in Zara. For me, it's about doing the work. The emotional work that I did was very important so that I wouldn't feel like I had to compensate by, like having the Chanel bag that all the girls in LA have. I'm not paying $8,000 for a purse. That's a very bad investment. And if you love purses and that's the thing for you and you save your money because you want that Chanel bag, and I love handbags, but I don't think that's a responsible decision. So I wake up every morning and the first thing I say is thank you, because I lived in a Best Western, I lived in an Expedition, I lived in people's houses, and I figured out a way to get on my feet and learn to make money and to let my money is energy, let my money make money. But I don't. When I come here and I get around my family, I'm just Aidita. Nobody is like. They just expect me to pay for everything now. But other than that, I just live my life like I've always lived my life. And the best experiences I always have are in a restaurant, not in a mall. I love food. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So again, huge fan. I feel like this is the 5th time I've told you this, but
Thank you.
So I guess a running theme that I've noticed as I hear you speak is how you've come to kind of like conclude on the multifacetedness that is, you know, people's identities, like your family's identities. And what struck me was like, you realize that your mom is not just your mom, right? Like she's her own person. And that's what helps people kind of like reach that level of forgiveness. Because that's something that we don't really have in the Latina community. Forgiveness is hard. Like I've never heard my parents apologize to me ever. And I probably never will. And, you know, I've made peace with that. It's culture, right? So I guess my question is, how did you get there? Like how was that journey? Because it's hard, right? Like these people that probably caused so much pain in our lives and growing up and all that. Like, how do you get there?
So if you think they hurt you, wait till you get outside. So, you know, I started to forgive myself and really do my work. I think that reciprocity is something you get when you give, right? I started focusing on what I wanted to have and how I wanted people to treat me. And what I learned about myself at one point, I was looking at some stand-up of myself when I did this Showtime special, and I looked so angry on stage. I think I scared people into laughing. I was like, yeah, I didn't smile one time. I was like, what the hell was I so mad about? And I mean, I can imagine what I was mad about at the time. But I feel like you gotta be what you want. And so my mom has learned a lot of stuff because of me, because before my mom would trigger me and I'll be like, you know, like, hey, you did this to me. You hit me with a broomstick. Like I would just keep regurgitating this stuff. And I just saw my mom as a person one day. And I looked at her and I was faced with her mortality, and I just gave her a kiss on her forehead and I gave her a hug. And I was like, I love you, Mommy. And that changed so much because she didn't have to fight me back. She didn't know what to do. She was like, what? You know, like, what is this? I think that if you say sometimes that your parents have never apologized to you, it would be wise for you to open your eyes and see if the apology is not verbal. Because sometimes the apology is, te hice tu pastel favorito, or mira, te compré esto para que. Sometimes the apology comes in a different way. Sometimes they don't know how to apologize. Nobody's ever apologized to them. And maybe you apologizing to them will teach them to apologize to you. And I know it's generational, because this generation of TikTok, I don't owe anybody an apology or an explanation. I don't have to teach any. You are obligated. My philosophy, and this is my opinion, is you are responsible to teach the people in your village. You don't have to teach Middle America what you are, but the people in your village, why not? You say you love them. If you have information, why wouldn't you share it with them? Being able to tell my grandmother, es pájaro no se dice. Like, that's not how you refer to a queer man. ¿Y por qué? Porque eso le duele cuando usted le dice eso a ellos. And just to have a conversation with her about that, and a usted no le gusta que le digan negra fea. Right? Eso es lo mismo. And she was like, I'll never say pájaro again. Because, you know, she had to, but it was my grandmother, and I adore her, and I want her to be a better person. So I think sometimes we got to have those conversations and we got to be what we want. And I know that feels like a lot. My kids are like, you walking around here like Jesus, like that's too much. I just want, they're like, I just want to say fuck you and just send them on their way. And I'm like, but what does that get you though? Like, what is it that you want out of your relationship with your parents? That's the thesis, right? That's what I wanted with my mom is a good relationship. That's my reinita, right? I adore that woman. So I had to roll up the sleeves and get down to do some education. And guess what? I learned something too. Because my mother has taught me so much in the last 5 years. And I never thought I would ever learn anything from her. Because in my mind, she's ignorant, she's angry, she's this, she's that. She's actually a survivor. I don't think I could survive the things my mother survived, right? But it's one step at a time. And it's all you work. Because the minute you start changing and you do the work, the world around you will start changing too. And you'll start seeing how you'll start attracting people to say, I'm sorry, and attracting people like, it's you work. Because you can't change anybody but yourself, right? You are never going to change your parents, but you changing, you being the example, is going to always attract like energy into your life. It's the greatest trick of all time.
Thank you.
I didn't realize I was attending a TED Talk. Thank you.
I know, man.
I'm going to drop it for you. Thank you so much. Thank you for your nuanced, amazing questions, too. The moderation.
Yes.
So, I love that part. This is a really biased question because I work in the people who write the books, the Louise Hayes or whatever. I've been in that industry for many years. So this might not even be your experience, but I'm wondering, a lot of those authors, they're white folks. And it sounds like you have an amazing ability to grab the nuance, grab what resonates for you and ditch what doesn't. But I'm also curious, was there stuff you had to suss through? And even the Napoleon Hill, this old school, were there things that you needed to reconcile and be this part's true for me. Let me put this in my own context. How did you integrate that stuff for you?
Well, that's a good question. I read a lot of people. Iyanla Vanzant's book, Yesterday I Cried, was a very big book in my life. But I think that having access to literature at a young age and never thinking that was for white people and thinking this is for me too. They didn't write this book, and the book doesn't say for whites only on the outside. I think if you I look at successful people. I read Kobe. I read about Michael Jordan. I love athletic minds because athletic minds see no limits, right? And I was like, I see myself in that. I just think it was important for me to look at winners and say, what are the winners doing? And they all have something in common, and they're not. Oprah gets on airplanes with Tom Cruise and Tom Hanks, and they fly around wherever they go, Rome, whatever they go do, that boring ass rich people do, to go get cheese and Balenciaga in Italy, whatever. But they all have this thing that they believe that there are no limits for them. They believe that they could do it. And so for me, reading those things, yes, I feel like Louise Hay probably operated differently than I did, walked in the world differently at the time that she was here. Louise Hay got raped when she was 5 years old, and my mother loves all of her books. She's read them all. I don't know. I think that at some point I started writing my own self-help book and saying these are the things that work for me, and these are the things that don't. These are the things that I read, and I'm not gonna lie to you. Malcolm Gladwell's book, Outliers, that didn't resonate with me. I was reading it and I was like, 10,000 hours, really? I know people who flip 10,000 burgers at McDonald's and they're gonna flip 11,000. So this has a lot to do with, yes, sure, practice and application, but I find what resonates with me, and Baltasar Gracian is one person that I was reading in Spanish as when I was a young mom, and there was this thing that he wrote about a man when he comes to himself. I know he was writing about men, literally men, but I saw myself in that, and I was like, I'm taking this because this applies to me, whether he didn't intended it for me or not. It's out into the world, and I have access to it.
Thank you.
Thank you, though, for that question.
Thank you both so very much.
Thank
It's a
you.
great session. It was wonderful.
I appreciate it.
Yes, and you'll be available for a few minutes outside to sign
Yes,
some
and
books?
then I'm taking my mom to the Mark Anthony concert.
All right. All right. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.